Welcome to Uncovered. I'm Anthony Davis. He's Ron Filipkowski. Together we are uncovering the MAGA propaganda that is not covered by the mainstream media or anyone for that matter. There's so much that we discover during the week, and Ron, as the editor-in-chief of MeidasTouch.com, will bring you all the news there. Here we bring it to life, and let's start with Trump's position on abortion. Finally, Ron, he has come out and taken a position. The timing of this and the announcement itself could not have gone worse for him, could it?
No, the timing, of course, was bad because it was right after Florida passed, the Florida Supreme Court made their ruling and allowed the abortion to go onto the ballot. And then Arizona, literally the next day after he makes his announcement, let's leave it up to the states. You know, they put an 1864 law into effect. So the timing of it was bad. The substance of it was bad. I mean, the only people who are real fans of this are, you know, his own MAGA cultists and Republicans who just care about winning elections, which is really the activists, the base, the elected officials. But, you know, there's this conundrum going on, and I'm watching very closely pro-life groups, you know, the groups that have been for outlawing abortion, who say abortion is murder all along, and life begins at conception. And they're pretty upset for the most part, you know, across the board. Does that mean they're not going to vote for him? Who knows? I mean, some of these people are gravitating towards RFK or some other write-in candidate. You know, Mike Pence gave a pretty strong statement. So he was
pretty furious, actually, wasn't he? He really felt like it was a slap in the face, he said.
Yeah. So I mean, when you're just saying leave it up to the states, you're saying he still hasn't stated his own personal opinion.
No.
And that's the other frustrating part of it, is he gets asked by reporters today, you know, what's your position on Arizona? What's your position on Florida? And his answer is just, I'm going to defer to them. Whatever they want to do is fine. Somebody at some point, one of these reporters who calls themselves reporters, needs to do their job and pin him down and say, all right, what is your opinion? How are you going to vote in Florida on this amendment? Are you going to vote for the 15 weeks to overturn the 6-week ban? Is that your position? What do you favor? He said today he didn't like the Arizona abortion law. Okay. All right. Well, what is your position? He won't say it.
But he doesn't have a position, though, does he? I mean, isn't this the whole point? As a populist who is deeply insecure, he will literally say whatever is necessary to either get him elected or to appease his supporters. And it's a little bit, he handled COVID in exactly the same way. He doesn't really have a position on Ukraine or on Gaza or anything, really. He is just doing what he is advised is going to be beneficial. And a lot of that advice, it seems, is also what Vladimir Putin wants as well, you know? So this is really who he answers to.
And I think it's even more so than in 16 or 20. I mean, in 16 or 20, you know, 16, he reinvented himself and came up with all these positions that Steve Bannon and others had crafted for him.
Yeah.
But I think there was at least a foundation of things there that he believed in, a handful of things that he believed in when he ran in 16. And then, of course, in 2020, he's trying to run on his record as president and sugarcoating it, et cetera, et cetera. But now that he's facing prison if he loses, he's completely untethered to any philosophical principles or beliefs whatsoever. And you're right. He will just say and do anything to win this race because it's either that or prison.
And he never, his language, which we always like to analyze, you can never pin him down. He's very good at using kind of general terms. Let's take a quick look at a clip of him making his announcement on Truth Social.
My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land, in this case, the law of the state. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people.
It would be remiss of me not to mention that he's the same color as the mahogany fireplace behind him. That is, I mean, he's just so weird. And the fact that we are having to try and analyze what he thinks and what he means and what it's all garbage, because it means nothing. None of this means anything. And in fact, if we look to Arizona and this law that's come in from 1864, that's the future of the Republican Party.
Yeah, and here's the other problem. He said this again. He said today, he went even further than what he just said. He keeps repeating this mantra, and that's the other thing that aggravates me, is that nobody, I mean, even I would think even some right-wing interviewers have to have a tiny bit of self-respect about their jobs, that they would not let him continue to say, everyone agrees that Roe versus Wade should have been overturned. He said that again today. He was more specific. He said, all Republicans and Democrats agree that Roe should have been overturned and this sent to the states. I mean, that's just obviously and blatantly wrong and untrue. This is not the case.
But that's why he mustn't be covered by the media. That's why he doesn't deserve any airtime, because nothing he says is based in truth. And, you know, they've been peddling this story about Democrats wanting to kill babies at 9 months, and they've been doubling down on that in the last couple of weeks. And nobody in history ever suggested aborting a baby at full term.
Well, let me tell you where he comes up with that, because he posted the clip again the other day.
Right.
And it all goes back to one 17-second clip of former Virginia Governor Ralph Northam. This is where, if you pinned him down and you said, where are you getting that from? This is what he will tell you. He doesn't remember his name, but he'll say, the guy who used to be the governor of Virginia.
Yeah.
Okay. And he posted this clip again. He's posted this multiple times, and right wingers do all the time. Ralph Northam, if I'm not mistaken, was an ER doctor, an OBGYN doctor, okay, who was the governor of Virginia. And in an interview, he was asked about late term abortions. And what he said in this interview, because I've watched the full interview, is, in very rare exceptional cases where the fetus is not viable, in other words, and it has very severe birth defects and will not survive outside the womb for more than a day or a few days and suffer and die, in those scenarios is the only time that these procedures will happen, which is like 1 in a million. Okay. But what they did with that clip is they cut out the line where he said, only in situations where the fetus is not viable and will not survive. They cut that line, and then they play the other 17 seconds. So what he's saying is, this is what Democrats believe, that this should be legal.
It's
because
so
of
offensive.
a 17-second clip from 2019 from Ralph Northam that's out of context.
And also, how do you go from, it being an issue for clinicians, and then suddenly say, no, actually, it's Democrats who decided this? How do you get from clinicians to Democrats? Because, anybody who works in that medical genre, they know so much about this process. They know it's, there is science. It is science-backed medicine. It is not about people who have political leanings making decisions about women's health care. It is disgraceful that it's even up for discussion when the rest of the world has moved on. And I don't know. I just beggars belief, because half the electorate, we should just remind people, half the electorate, actually 51%, are women. And based on this, how can a single woman or even a feminist care to vote for this man based on these lies?
But he will no longer do what he did in 16 and 20 and do sit-down interviews with an objective journalist who will actually play the full clip and say, look, this is what he said. What you're saying is not true. He will not do those interviews anymore. So he just lies. He just a fire hose of lies, the typical Trump playbook.
Kari Lake has been pressed on this issue as well, hasn't she? Let's take a look at her under in her favorite place, the TV studio.
Kari, we'll start with you on this one. The new law banning abortion, the new law banning abortion in Arizona after 15 weeks. There's that law, and there's a territorial era law which bans all abortion. Zippo, over. Which law do you think should take effect?
My personal belief is that all life matters, all life counts, and all life is precious, and I don't believe in abortion. I think the older law is going to go into effect. That's what I believe will happen.
Okay, but you approve of that? What, at conception?
I believe life begins at conception.
Okay, what do we do about abortion pills? What do we do about...
I don't think abortion pills should be legal. That's a very...
Not in Arizona. Karen, what do you think?
Again, ask the clinicians. They'll tell you that life doesn't begin at conception. But that's not the point. The point is that this entire story has been hijacked by politicians, and then it's been handed over to voters, supporters in this case, and turned into the hot button issue for this election.
So let's review Lake's position, because this is, she's lying as usual. That clip that you just played was from 2022 when she ran for governor. Okay. And so that was before Roe was overturned. And so none of us knew, A, whether it was going to be overturned, and B, what was going to happen if it was. Like, what was going to be the political fallout. I can tell you that a lot of Republicans believed that the majority of the country was with them on this issue. They have learned since then through these referendums that the country is not with them on this issue. So that's what has changed. So Kari Lake, when this decision came out, she was probably the first one that rushed out a statement that said, I don't agree with this Arizona law. I don't agree with this. I think it should be 15 weeks. And then what we did is dug up that clip and 4 other clips of her back in 2022 saying, no, she favors the Arizona law. So what's changed? What's changed is she now understands, and her campaign team now understands, that this is deeply unpopular and could cost her the election. And the other thing is that the Arizona activists have gotten enough signatures to get this on the ballot this time. And it wasn't on the ballot in 2024. So she knows that this is going to cost her Senate race if she was going to win it in the first place. This is going to cost her the race. And so now she's immediately backpedaling and taking it all back and lying. Even last night, her campaign senior advisor responded to my post saying, no, Kari Lake was never in favor of this 2022 law. Well, we've got her on tape.
It's always down to the tape, isn't it? There's just so much tape these days. Don't you love how we call it tape when tape hasn't been used for 25 years?
Well, we're old.
Let's kind of move from Arizona to Florida now, because Ron DeSantis has had a lot to say about the abortion issue, because it looks like it's pretty much on the ballot there, on the ticket there, in addition to marijuana. Let's have a little listen to him.
Once voters figure out how radical both of those are, they're going to fail. They are very, very extreme. Look at the weed one, for example. The weed one is not just decriminalized. It's basically a license to have it anywhere you want. So no time, place, and manner restrictions. This state will start to smell like marijuana in our cities and towns. It will reduce the quality of life. So I think as people see that on these things and how extreme it is, that they're gonna do. I mean, for example, I go every part of Florida, not just South Florida. I see marijuana stores. We have medical marijuana in this state that has been approved, and I implemented it. They hadn't implemented it before I became governor. I implemented it and satisfied the intent. But do we really need to do more with that? Do we want to have more marijuana in our communities? I don't think it'll work out well, but it is a very, very broad amendment. And then likewise, the abortion is like a California abortion, overrides our parental consent laws, very, very extreme in a number of different ways. So I think as voters...
Come and get your California abortions. Why do these people... all, Trump, DeSantis, very similar. Kari Lake's a little bit better. But there is just no ability to communicate. Like the language, it's like children talking in kindergarten. That there's no intellect behind any of their analysis or any of their speech. And I find it so frustrating because it just dumbs down all of the political discourse.
Yeah, I mean, what he's talking about, the Florida, the referendum that's in Florida is intentionally not radical. The people who they want it to pass. They want the 15-week window to pass, and so they intentionally did not make it radical. He's talking about parental consent. I mean, if a 16-year-old girl gets raped by her stepfather, she does not have to get the stepfather's consent to get the abortion. That's the point. Okay, so I don't think that's especially radical. Ron is reading the room incorrectly here, because here's the part that he really doesn't understand. Okay, is that and it's hard for me to say this because he won 2 elections, but he really doesn't understand this fact that the Republicans in Florida, conservative Republicans in Florida, are different than Bible Belt Southern Republicans in other states. They are very libertarian. There is a strong libertarian streak to Floridians. And the Floridians and the Republicans that he got to move down here during COVID did it for libertarian reasons, for freedom reasons. They did not come down here to pound Bibles. They came down here because they wanted freedom from COVID restrictions to do. Florida has always been about doing whatever the hell you want to do, and really a lack of personal responsibility or collective responsibility. That's what Florida has always been about. That's why people came here. So he's reading the room very wrong here, or he's just spinning. I can tell you the medical marijuana procedure here in Florida is extremely expensive and cumbersome. It's a racket. And why DeSantis doesn't like this too is because his cronies and friends got these marijuana licenses for these distributorships that are very difficult to get and very lucrative. And all of his friends and donors got those licenses. So yes, he doesn't want this to pass. Yes, the marijuana doctors here who charge $150 for a 5-minute phone appointment every 6 months, they don't want it to pass, but it is going to pass. And in fact, who else said it was going to pass? Both were going to pass. Donald Trump said that today in Atlanta when he was asked, what do you think about the Florida amendment? So he's wrong, A, and B, it's going to drive so many new voters to the polls, both in Florida and in Arizona, where these are both on the ballots. And let me just go back to Arizona for a second, because that is critical, because here Trump is banking on winning Georgia and Arizona. Okay. And I think that some Democrats were very concerned that it was going to be very difficult for Biden to win, certainly Georgia, but also Arizona. But now, and for this reason, if Biden loses Arizona and Georgia, he has to sweep the North. He has to win every northern state except for New Hampshire and Ohio. He's got a clean sweep Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. And Nevada's not going to be no easy thing. So if Biden wins Arizona, that then opens up a lot more possibility. He could lose one of those northern states and still win. That's why this is so important electorally, and for more than just the abortion issue.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention finally on the abortion issue that for people who are struggling with the clinical aspects of abortion right now because of state law, for them, what they're going through, having to try to access services, not knowing whether the clinic they're going to is a genuine clinic or it's one that's been set up by the Christian right to talk them out of abortion, or if they're having to cross state lines to access health care, that to hear this topic being kicked about like a soccer ball by politicians must be very, very hard. And I think it's important that we remember that at the heart of this are real people, humans with emotions and also the kind of physical and emotional aspect of this thing. It's a real story. It is not it's not just political propaganda.
Yeah, you're right. And sometimes I have to catch myself doing that because we're a political show and we're talking politics and elections, and that's what we do. And so we're approaching everything from that angle. And you're right. Sometimes you forget that this has actual real toll on people's lives.
Yeah. And if only the lawmakers would remember. Okay, let's talk about Mike Johnson. Talking of lawmakers, second in line to the presidency, and he is facing an uprising from Marjorie Taylor Greene and her Is her team still the Freedom Caucus, or has she created a new band of brothers now?
No, she's all by herself. She got kicked out.
She got
kicked out of the Freedom Caucus. So
that's right, for arguing over who
her.
was going to get to impeach Joe Biden first. I remember now.
She had a long meeting today with Mike Johnson. Apparently, they were in there 45 minutes. She came out and said she was not satisfied. Yeah, she refused to speak to him over the 2-week break, but then she finally did today. She said she was not satisfied. It looks like her red line is Ukraine. I mean, that's what it all comes down to for her. She's clearly, basically a Russian agent. She repeats Putin's talking points verbatim almost every day. And so that's her big thing. So the question is going to be, what are you going to do then if Ukraine aid does pass, which Johnson has pledged that he's going to bring it up for a vote. That's what he said before the break, although here we are Wednesday and it's still not brought up for a vote, but he says he's going to. If he brings it up for a vote, it's going to pass. And so the big question is, will Marge bring the motion to vacate to the floor? And then the second big question is, are any of these other Republicans who up to this point have said that they're not willing to join her on this, will they be so upset by Ukraine aid passing that they will join her, or is she still just out on a limb by herself? That's what we don't know.
Mike Johnson himself is, stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea on this, I guess. I just want to play this little clip of him from a couple of days ago before they had their meeting. Just listen to the way he talks. I always find it very interesting to try and kind of get under the skin of him. Like, he's terrified of her. I get that feeling. But he also really has very little authority. And as speaker, that is not good. Let's take a look.
Choice that we had.
Yeah. What about as it relates to Marjorie Taylor Greene, real quick? So you've reached out, but she's not returning your calls or something along those lines?
We exchanged text messages over the break multiple times and told her that I really would love to visit by phone or at her convenience, and she said she wasn't interested in that. So,
okay.
Yeah, there he is. I find him fascinating. To me, he's like a ventriloquist dummy. He looks like Jerry Mahoney.
Yeah, that was a fascinating interview, and I always like watching David Brody interviews. I don't agree with him, but you see there's CBN's Christian Broadcasting Network. So, because you're always going to get a lot of religious Christian questions. That's why Trump won't go on his show anymore. But it was interesting to hear Johnson talk about his leadership style from a biblical perspective, which was fleshed out a little bit more in that interview, which Brody just posted today. And I was listening to it, and it's like he keeps emphasizing. He was talking about Green, how the Bible has taught him to, turn the other cheek and not lash out and not get upset and reason with people and et cetera, et cetera. He went through this whole his philosophy on being speaker. Is Bible based, Bible principle based. And I was listening to this and I'm like, well, he is correct what he's saying. The Bible does say these things, but I'm just thinking, how can you run the house this way? I don't think the Bible was really set up to be able to run a political organ as diverse and as intense and with so many competing agendas. I don't know that the Bible is a great instruction book for that particular job.
I hear he's building an ark for the for the apocalypse, and we'll see those animals go 2 by 2. Talking of which, and conspiracies, the eclipse was a whole thing a couple of days ago, and it hadn't occurred to me that Republicans would seize on the eclipse and turn it into a conspiracy regarding politics. Marjorie Taylor Greene, though, when she's not hanging out with the speaker, she had a good go at it, didn't she? She posted this tweet: God is sending America strong signs to tell us to repent, earthquakes and eclipses and many more things to come. I pray that our country listens.
So there were a bunch of these that came from the right after the earthquake, since this was
the New York earthquake,
New York, New Jersey earthquake,
like
correct?
A 4.7, which
that it was God sending a sign that he was unhappy about the Trump trials and prosecutions in New York, conversely, they were upset at liberals. New York is liberal, New Jersey's liberal, and that's God is mad at them, those kind of things. So what you have to do when you do what I do is kind of sort through those and sift through those of the people who are just throwing out ridiculous things for clickbait. And there are plenty of those on the right. And then the people who really mean it. And in Greene's case, she really means what she said. In fact, her boyfriend, Brian Glenn, followed that up with even a stronger statement that this was something that was coming from God. So it's awfully frightening when you think that these people are in serious positions of power, either in the media or in politics, who actually believe this kind of nonsense. But that's where we are with the Republican
But this is
Party.
why the separation of church and state is so essential. And the line has not just become blurred, but it has become diluted so much now that from the perspective of Mike Johnson as Speaker, he has said outward that he does not believe in the separation of church and state. He's actually said those words. And that is very problematic, not just for secular people, but as you describe, trying to interpret the Bible and religion and twist it so that it suits politics is a really dark and dangerous road to go down. And that's what the entire Republican presidency with Project 2025 is based on. If you were to read that document from the Heritage Foundation, it is just laced with Christian right, and it's going to change America fundamentally.
The Republicans do not believe in separation of church and state. They would say it's not in the Constitution. It was a Supreme Court interpretation of the Constitution, of the Establishment Clause, and it's not legitimate, just like Roe versus Wade wasn't legitimate constitutional interpretation. To them, it shouldn't be there, and they're hoping that the Supreme Court will overturn that old Lemon test, which is the name of the Supreme Court case, and do away with it. And what they're doing is they're already pushing the boundaries and testing that. We're seeing this in the schools where we just had the Oklahoma superintendent of schools, the person who's in charge of all the Oklahoma schools last night, basically said he wants to put pastors and priests in public schools, like employ them as counselors. So instead of having guidance counselors, which was what many of us grew up with, who sort of try and counsel you and point you in the right direction and all of that, they want to use pastors and priests in the public school system, hire them basically as guidance counselors. And of course, they're not talking about Muslim pastors either. And they're diverting tax dollars into religious schools now, which has also been illegal under constitutional law, but they're pressing that issue as well. So we're seeing this not just in what you talked about, but in policy across the board, and very much abortion stuff is part of that too.
Incidentally, this concept of repentance, which Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of wrote about in her Eclipse tweet, for those of us who are not religious, we do not have the ability to repent. Like, it's not really a facility available to us. We can't go to confession. We can't kind of try and get
right with God.
Right? So the way we deal with life is we just don't commit those crimes in the first place. And I honestly do think that this is a subject people don't really talk about enough. Is that, the Christianity in its extreme forms. I'm not talking about moderate people. I'm not suggesting people shouldn't be religious in their own way, but these extreme forms of Christianity, they actually can be used as an excuse and then the catalyst to do bad. And we often hear that is the case.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing to realize that the vast majority of churchgoers or Christians don't mix politics with the religion, and their pastors don't do that, and their priests don't do that. The majority, we're talking about this hardcore, maybe 20% that do that, and it's also this Republican canard belief that all Democrats are godless heathens. None of them believe in God. None of them are Christian. They're all Marxist. But of course, that is, it's absolutely ridiculous. I can tell you on my Twitter pages, I have fights in the replies between Democrats on religion, who are some of them are very religious and are arguing with atheists and stuff. So it's just absolutely not true, these stereotypes. But so it's a very dangerous thing to me. I would never go to a church, and I'm a Christian, as you know, I would never go to a church where the pastor involves anything political. I would get up and walk out. And I think a lot of Christians would do that.
And there is a whole movement to educate pastors to be Trump followers. This is the Michael Flynn movement. This is this whole, they tour the country trying to, brainwash and educate these or re-educate these pastors to bring politics into their sermons. Let's talk about Donald Trump's legal situation, because we're just a few days away from the first criminal case for a former president of the United States, where he will have to show up. He has to, he has to be present. He is terrified, isn't he? And he has taken so many steps in the last few days through threats on his posts, but also even trying to sue the judge, where did that come from? And then continuing to post about the judge's daughter despite 2 gag orders.
As you know, I follow him very closely, every word he says. And I've been saying on shows previous to this that he was in denial about this, just like he was about the fraud case, having to put up the money for the fraud. And this is his MO. He always believes that he's going to find a way out of it, because his whole life he always has. He's never been held accountable. So he has this reflex where he always believes he's going to get out of something. And that's why he didn't make arrangements to post the bond money until the last minute, and then he had to scramble. And it's the same thing with this trial. I don't believe that he ever really thought that this was going to happen until 2 days ago. I think when that final last-ditch appeal they took to the New York Appeals Court, and they immediately rejected it and said, you are going to trial Monday, and the judge sent out the jury questionnaires. I think that was on Monday. I think that's when it really hit him. And you've seen in the last 24 hours, he's come unglued. He was up last night at like 1:48, I think was his last post AM in the morning, ranting and raving about the judge in this trial. And then he was up at 6 a.m. doing it again. So he's sleeping 4 hours now. I mean, and this is not a civil case, as I've said, where he can just pop in and pop out like before. He is going to have to be there Monday morning in New York, day after day after day for weeks until this trial is over.
Like regular people, Ron, like
everybody else,
like regular people would have to go to court when asked. I mean, it blows my mind that because he's doing the same tactic he did with COVID, right? If he closes his eyes, he thinks he can make it go away.
Right.
And that's what he's done with this. This is his superiority complex. This is his narcissism. This is all these aspects of his personality disorders playing out. But when it comes to the law of the land, you can't squint and make it go away.
And you know what he said? You're right. You know what he said? The first time he said this was this morning. When he posted, he said, they're trying to put me in jail. That's the first time he's used that word in one of his rants about this case. And that tells me that he's actually thinking now for the first time, I could actually be going to jail in the next couple of weeks, which he actually literally could. That is going to be there's a few things about this trial that worry me and that are question. First of all, what the main thing that worries me is the fact that 2 of the main witnesses in this case, Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels, are very impeachable. You know, they've given a million media statements. They've been all over the place. They've said different things over the years. I think in the case of Michael, he's a little bit more emotional and high strung than Stormy, and he's a little bit of a wild card, and he can sometimes minimize his own culpability. And sometimes I think if he is calm and he is honest and he takes responsibility completely for what he did and doesn't minimize things and admits prior lies, I think his testimony will go well. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to do that when he's being cross-examined by Trump's lawyers, and that's what I'm worried about. I'm far less worried about Stormy Daniels because I think she can take just about anything that they throw at her and handle it quite well because she's been in the porn industry. She's dealt with a lot of assholes, jerks. I think she can handle herself. So that's really what worries me about the case is that. But the big question mark is, let's say he loses. I mean, what is the judge going to do? Because in most criminal cases, you lose a trial. I mean, you're going to jail right then and there. I mean, is he going to get, again, special treatment because he's running for president?
This is a serious issue for America to consider, isn't it? Because, he's seeking immunity from the Supreme Court. I mean, even without them covering this, sanctioning this, he still does have some built-in immunity by definition of the fact that he is a former president, disgraced or otherwise. And that was what was so frustrating for me with Judge Engoron, for example, where I really wanted them to stick him in a cell just for a night to make him realize how serious this was. Do you think that this judge, different judge, different circumstances, different type of court, do you think that this judge is going to, tell us a little bit about the judge, maybe we can get a sense of how he might perform considering his background?
I think this judge is much more no nonsense, much firmer and tougher than Engoron. Absolutely he is. And I think that Trump has attacked this judge's family. He's attacked him personally. He's attacked his daughter. All the things you are not supposed to do with a criminal judge. But I think go back to what you said, it's in the back of every judge's mind. If I put a president in jail, I'm the first judge that's ever done that in the history of the republic. The logistics of that with Secret Service and all of that, and the fact that he is the Republican nominee for president right now, and the entire country will absolutely go nuts. Some people nuts because they're happy, some people nuts because they're furious, and that is one person's decision.
Yeah.
It makes it very, very difficult. And so I really don't know what this judge will do if he's convicted. Of course, the doomsday scenario is if he wins this case, which is a possibility because this is the weakest case of the four.
Yes.
If he wins this case, that he's going to get a bump in the polls and he'll be jubilant, and there's just no telling. So it's really, really hard to figure out after this trial happens how things are going to play out.
Let me just read one of Trump's late night tweets so we can get a sense of how he's feeling about this. He says the White House thugs should not be allowed to have these dangerous and unfair Biden trials during my campaign for president. All of them civil and criminal could have been brought more than 3 years ago. It's an illegal attack on a political opponent. It is communism at its worst. It's election interference at its best. No such thing has ever happened in our country before. On Monday, I will be forced to sit gagged before a highly conflicted and corrupt judge whose hatred for me has no bounds. All of these New York and D.C. judges and prosecutors have the same mindset. Nobody but this Soros prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, wanted to take this ridiculous case. All legal scholars say it's a sham. Biden's DOJ is running the case. Just think of it, these animals want to put the former president of the United States, who got more votes than any sitting president, and the party's Republican candidate in jail for doing absolutely nothing wrong. It is a rush to the finish. So unfair. We should point out, none of that is true.
Well, there's only one part of it that's true. I was reading a statement. I'm like, that's not true. That's not true. That's not. Yeah, virtually every line is a lie. Yeah. There's only one part they could have been brought sooner. That's the only.
But we all asked for that. We all wanted that, and that's what is so frustrating. And then of course evidence came out that Merrick Garland had been slow walking this in some kind of way, which was very frustrating, because the time that it's taken has diminished the crime, and that is invariably, I appreciate the statute of limitations and all that, but ultimately, if you can't get on with it quickly, then people have short memories.
It gives him the whole argument that he's making, which is, why didn't they bring it before? This clearly shows that they're just doing it for election interference. That by stalling and delaying it, it just opens the door to his demagoguery. And some people listen to that and go, oh yeah, it does seem, I hear this time and time again from interviews and man on the street interviews from Fox, that people say, yeah, it does seem a little shady that this is happening now in the middle of the election. Reality too is some of it is because Trump delayed these cases. They should have happened last year. But look, this is a case that happened 5 years ago, longer than that. It could have been brought a long time ago, and it wasn't. So
And
that's
there
the only
are
part he's right about.
there are an increasing number of people, I feel, who have sympathy with Donald Trump because of the way he's playing it and making it out that, he's just trying to, get elected and this is election interference. I mean, as false as that is, it is a very strong argument for people who are already, take an interest in him.
And his argument where he says, Biden is controlling all this, of course, that's all a lie. This is the New York Manhattan DA's office. But again, what his argument for that is that the lead prosecutor on this case was a former federal prosecutor, okay, under a Democratic administration. So he was brought in because he's an excellent prosecutor and he's an excellent trial lawyer and he knows what he's doing. And so he was brought in and hired by Bragg to help him handle this case. But that's where he's getting that this is all coming from DOJ and Biden because Bragg hired a former federal prosecutor.
And this is why you shouldn't have politically appointed DAs and prosecutors who have to, share their political persuasion in the same way that you shouldn't mix church and state. Church and state separate, politics and law separate. Wouldn't that be nice?
Unfortunately, that's pretty much what we have in this country, though. So
right. But my point is that's what happens in other parts of the world, and they get on with it.
Look at the Georgia RICO case. You got both the judge and the prosecutor in the middle of elections right now are being challenged. And that case is one of the main issues in the campaign, and the judge can't even talk about it. So, yes, it's crazy to think that the judge presiding over the Georgia RICO case is running in an election right now where he's being challenged by a black civil rights lawyer, and he's not even allowed to talk about it. It's a crazy system.
Yeah. I mean, even hearing you say a judge running for election, that should be an oxymoron. It's all wrong, Ron. It's all Ron. Let's talk about Melania for a moment. She's made a couple of contractual appearances. I love the way that you say she's always like on the books and on the clock. It's like, if you want to book Melania, I think Trump has to go through like a looky-likey agency these days just to get his own wife to show up to events. The fundraiser, though, where he claimed he'd raised more than Biden raised in New York at Radio City Music Hall last week, there's no proof or evidence that he raised even a dime more, and somebody predicted it was probably around $5 million that he raised. But you posted this video of Melania, and you said she looked like she was a hostage in a hostage video. Let's take a quick look.
Just wanting change. Rich people want it, poor people want it, everybody wants change. Our country is really doing poorly. We're a laughing stock all over the world, and we're going to get that change very quickly. And this has been some incredible evening before.
Yeah. He's a laughing stock all over the world. America is not a laughing stock. People look up to the United States. He was the one that put a stain on its international success. Tell us about why Melania is why she's shown up on this day and not any other.
Well, this was his major fundraiser. This was his big event where he was going to raise all this money, and he claimed that he raised $50 million. I tend to doubt that. I don't think that that's true at all, but that's what he claimed. So she needed to make this appearance because, as we know, she has not been at a single campaign event on the road with him outside Mar-a-Lago at all in 18 months, not one. So when I post that she's a hostage, I always get some pushback from people who say, no, she's in it with him. And that's not really what I'm saying. I'm not saying she's a victim here when I say that. What I'm saying is she makes it very obvious to everyone that she does not want to be there. She does it all the time.
Showing up is like the bare minimum. That's what she'll do.
Bare minimum. Yeah. And she lets everybody know, when now the only time, and what the Trump campaign is, they'll get occasional like snapshots of her smiling. And what it is if she sees somebody she knows or a friend of hers or some fan or something that's Melania, she'll smile at that person and then they'll put that out. Melania's happy. She loves Trump. But you notice when she's next to him, when she's solely with him, she looks miserable. Yeah. She's a good actress. She can fake that a lot better if she wanted to, but she doesn't even want to. She's letting the whole world know, like, I can't stand this guy. I don't want to be here, but I have to.
It's like she's done with him. She's just done. And I'm sure that, whatever it's costing him to get her to show up, maybe she was on 10% of whatever they raised that night to make an appearance. Didn't she get an award as well? This was at Mar-a-Lago. This was an award for the Child Advocacy Award, but she didn't even show up to collect it. Here's the clip.
On board. We want to take this opportunity. I know my First Lady couldn't get here, but we want to give Melania Trump the Child Advocacy Award because she said she did so much for children when she was First Lady. So, sir, this is for Melania. Please make your way to the...
So fake. Everything is so fake. She didn't do anything for children when she was First Lady. But
well, you're ready for me to break some news here and make this even worse?
Yeah.
You know who that guy is?
Go on.
That guy's Tom Homan. Tom Homan was the architect of the child separation policy at the border under Trump. He was Trump's ICE director. So you have the guy who created the child separation policy at the border giving Melania a child advocacy award.
It does not surprise me. He should have taken the award for himself. He's more maybe he's more deserving of it. It's just so weird. All of these performative sequences designed to pat each other on the back and give the impression that they have a soul, and it really has nothing. When they try and bring Christianity into it, I know good Christians. These people are not it.
I think where he came up with the idea is he thought he could get Melania to show up at that thing,
right?
That was a fundraiser for his organization. And
so they baited her.
We were
watching. She didn't take the bait.
Baiting her. And the reason why he got that idea is because Melania last year, when she was completely out of sight, nobody had seen her in like over a year. The Log Cabin Republicans came up with a great scheme, which is the gay Republican group, came up with a great scam to get her to show up by naming her their Statesman of the Year. She got the Statesman of the Year award, and she was going to be honored as like a champion of gay rights. So that was the only event she showed up at in Mar-a-Lago for like the whole year, was the Log Cabin Republican thing, because they gave her that award. So she showed up to accept it. So I think Homan kind of had the same idea that, like, if I have this award from Melania, maybe I can get her to show up, but she didn't show up for Homan.
Yeah. Are we surprised? Let's talk about another of Trump's cases. This one is the stolen documents case, the espionage case, which Judge Eileen Cannon is overseeing. She presented a really bizarre ruling this week, didn't she?
This is really crazy. I mean, she's just nuts. I mean, we know that, but this ruling, when I read it, I was just astounded. And look, I don't watch TV, and I try not to read anybody. When the ruling gets handed down like this, I get them right away. I try not to read any other lawyer's take or talking heads take, because I don't want to be influenced by their opinion. And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, what she's doing is she's trying to avoid an appeal. So she's denying the motion to dismiss. But then what she's saying there, see, the key here is what she said: the Presidential Records Act does not provide on a pre-trial basis. That's the key. So what she's saying is she may dismiss this case during the trial on these grounds, but she's not going to do it pre-trial. That's number one. And number two, she is considering jury instructions on the Presidential Records Act during trial, but won't rule on them before trial to allow Smith to appeal. So again, that was my take on it. I wrote an article about it. And then, so I'm thinking, geez, am I just being too cynical? Am I reading this wrong? And then I opened up Twitter, and then I saw like virtually every other lawyer had exactly the same take I did, which is like, this judge is crazy.
But let's be clear, she's a Trump-appointed judge. Why was she appointed, right? Obviously, Trump didn't know this was all going to play out, didn't know which judge was going to get this case. But why choose people like her, inexperienced and clearly a MAGA Republican?
Well, and she was not vetted like a lot of other judges. She was not appointed early on in his term when, Democrats might have had some input into her background and all of that. She was a last minute 11th hour appointment, and these happen all the time in presidencies where Mitch McConnell was ramming through all these last minute appointments, knowing that Trump was on his way out, a Democrat was coming in. And she was one of these that got through at the very last minute right before Trump left office. So there wasn't a lot of scrutiny of her. There wasn't a lot of interviews or questions. Her background as a lawyer was very shaky, very thin. She had no prior judicial experience. So she was one of these stealth people that you put through and hope, well, we'll just stash her down in Fort Pierce, this small little podunk town, and maybe she can't do too much harm. And she was down there. She did a couple of trials. She screwed them up. And then she gets this case dumped into her lap randomly. This judge who just got appointed, who has very little experience, and now has like the biggest case in the world dumped into her lap. And, some people said, some people's spin is, oh, she's incompetent. I think it goes beyond incompetent. She's not just incompetent. She is incompetent, but she's intentionally sabotaging this case, in my opinion.
It's so interesting, isn't it? How much of that randomness of her receiving this case is random, and how much of it was crowbarred in by one of Trump's worker bees?
There's no way to know. The chief judge assigns these cases, and it's supposed to be entirely random, luck of the draw, spit out a computer. And I think there was like 4 judges it could have gone to, and so it was like a 25% chance, and she got the case. So we'll never know.
I've been reading that Jack Smith's got quite a lot up his sleeve to, bring evidence forward. He's got like 49 witnesses, all of them Republicans. This is for the, overturning the election case as opposed to stealing the documents case. I mean, it's just jokes, isn't it? The rape trial and which is the one that's happening on Monday. That's the paying off a porn star. Yeah, hush money. I mean, you couldn't make this sounds like script from The Sopranos or something, right? These storylines are a whole little kind of mini TV series in themselves. But are you feeling confident? We don't hear much from Jack Smith. He plays his cards very close to his chest. But are you feeling confident that could be the case that really, closes down this kind of whole Trump nightmare?
The word on the street, the word behind the scenes in Trump world is that is the case that he is most worried about. I think the reason why he's most worried about it is because it's Judge Chutkan, it's a DC jury, and it's all about and it's all Republicans. Like you said, it's his former appointees, friends, officials that are testifying against him. And the evidence in that case directly relates to his fitness for office. So it will affect the election much more so than this New York case. In other words, people will look at the New York case. I don't think it's going to change their vote one way or the other, but the J6 case very much could change people's minds on the election. And so I think that's the one he's worried about. The other issue is this: that case is essentially ready for trial. That case is ready to go to trial. Discovery is completed. Pretrial motions are completed. Everything is done. The only thing we're waiting on is the Supreme Court. So if we get a Supreme Court ruling in May, hopefully June at the very latest, that case could immediately be put on a trial docket for July or August and go. And I think that is what's going to happen. I hope so. And that's why Trump is worried about that case more than the other cases.
Talking of January 6th, RFK Jr. has, he's had a controversy this week of his own, hasn't he? The way he kind of described the January 6th, those who got convicted and put into prison. We watched them all on the videos, smashing the place down, 174 police officers attacked, 5 deaths. I mean, you'd have to be a fool not to know what went on that day. They put out a press release to try and correct it, though, didn't they?
This is just really astounding, what he's trying to say here and what he's trying to do, where he's essentially trying to use J6 to attract Trump supporters. In other words, the only thing that this statement does is make some Trump supporters maybe convince them to vote for him and absolutely infuriate Democrats. So that's why we jumped all over this statement and made a big deal out of it. And I think a lot of people did, because what he's saying here is, that he doesn't agree with Trump's actions on January 6th, but for the most part, he says he doesn't really see that much wrong with what most people did, and that he's going to launch an investigation of the law enforcement agencies who investigated January 6th and into the prosecutors like Jack Smith who handled it. He mentioned the word prosecutorial misconduct. So who is his constituency for this kind of a statement? In other words, you would think an independent is trying to pull people from both sides. He's trying to pull some of the Democrats away, and he's got the Kennedy name brand to do that. And then he's trying to pull some right wingers away too, and kind of put those two together like Ross Perot did back in '92. But a statement like that is just dumbfounding, because there is no one on the left who agrees with a single word of that. So if the point was to try and win over some Trump supporters, okay, but it seems like his whole strategy is mostly to try and pull from Biden, and this statement does not do that.
But, there's two issues at play here as I see it. Number one, he is bonkers, right? So whatever he says, again, we're trying to make sense of it. We're trying to analyze it. We're wasting our time, Ron. He's just bonkers. Secondly, this video was leaked yesterday, which I'm sure you saw, which is of his New York campaign director. And she was training some of the RFK comrades, and she basically goes, look, we're just trying to get Donald Trump elected. She basically admitted that there was a way to pull votes away from Joe Biden. She talked about the Democrats as being the enemy, and the whole thing, the whole RFK movement is a ruse to get Donald Trump elected. It's as clear as day, and she admitted it in this video.
Yeah, well, he's not only he's nuts, it's obviously everybody around him is nuts too, including her. Because if that's the strategy, that's why this January 6th statement makes no sense.
Right.
If that's, it makes sense for him to do the Cesar Chavez event in LA, because that clearly he's going for, the liberal Latino vote, the worker vote, the workers' rights vote, agricultural workers. Okay, that makes sense to me if you're trying to help Trump win, to try and pull those people away from Biden. But this J6 statement, I mean, you're basically siding with the J6ers. That's only going to infuriate people on the left. So it makes no sense. But yes, I do believe that Steve Bannon is the one who recruited him to run. And I was listening to Steve Bannon do that in real time. I was watching his show when RFK would go on there, and Bannon would bring this up a couple of years ago. You should run as a third party. You should run against Biden. So he put that idea in RFK's head, and RFK is he loves attention. He loves the adulation. And he got a lot of that back in the 80s and early 90s when he was doing all his environmental work. He got all that attention. But then when he had all his marital issues and his wife killed herself and all of his affairs and his drug use, all of that fell apart and he went off the radar. And then with all of his COVID mania and conspiracy theories, he became famous and relevant again with that segment of people, and he's basking in that. So him running for president keeps that. In other words, after all the COVID nuts have kind of gone away and gone back into the woodwork, he's able to still stay in the spotlight because he's running. So I think when Bannon put that idea in his head, it really appealed to him. Like, yeah, I can keep this gravy train going.
Yeah, because they're all pulling a salary from it. That's the other thing. There's money to be made, and
he is. In fact, his nonprofit that he runs, he doubled his salary in 2021 during COVID. So when everybody else was hurting economically, he doubled his salary from his nonprofit.
Finally, let's talk about Kari Lake's fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago. There was a special guest who showed up, barely recognizable actually in this garb, Roseanne Barr, formerly of the Roseanne Show, who is now firmly in the Trump camp. I'll just show the clip and then we can react to it.
How are you doing? I'm supporting Kari Lake, and it was a fantastic evening, and our Trump is here being the DJ, and I've just danced, and everyone's amazed. So I'm just going to say to you, please drop out of college because it's going to ruin your lives. Do me a favor, drop out. They don't teach you nothing good. Email me or Twitter me or whatever you call me, and I'll help you with your life, but you've got to get out of college because it isn't nothing but devil-worshipping, baby blood-drinking Democrat donors. Love ya.
Love ya. I don't even know what to say about this stuff, Ron. What's your take?
You know, when I first saw that, I see a third of a bottle of Pinot Grigio in a red wine glass.
Yeah.
And, that hits close to home for me. I've been in that position a few times myself at parties, especially when you're at parties where you don't necessarily like all the people there. So that when I first saw that glass, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, she drinks a lot. But the other funny part is she was the headliner for Kari Lake. So Kari Lake holds this fundraiser, comes all the way across the country from Arizona to Mar-a-Lago to have this big fundraiser. And her headline entertainment was Roseanne Barr, which, shows you the quality of entertainment that they're able to get on the right when she's the headliner. And of course, she shows up loaded and progressively got worse, because I saw earlier videos of her earlier in the night. That was sort of towards the end when she was coming unglued. And yes, she's repeating this stuff about people in Hollywood drinking babies' blood and the adrenochrome and all of this stuff that I heard her spouting when she spent 2 hours on Alex Jones's show last year when she was slamming vodka from the bottle in the middle of that show. So the idea that a United States Senate candidate, a serious United States Senate candidate, would bring somebody like that in as their headline entertainment for a serious fundraiser shows you exactly where the Republican Party and the MAGA movement is.
Yeah, it's a sorry state of affairs, really, because again, it's almost like they're just having their own party. That what they don't have much care for humanity or for regular people. It's like it's very, and I felt this with Alina Harbour's birthday party, and was seeing them in their jewels and dressed in their finest and drinking champagne, and I was like, you guys are just so far removed from the people that you claim to represent. And that's the saddest part of this story, is that their voters are like turkeys voting for Thanksgiving. It's a terrible mistake. And Donald Trump is like the least godly and last person who will ever be there for you. And yet they are totally down the rabbit hole.
And the interesting postscript to that, and by the way, she's also talked about running for governor of Hawaii. She's a Hawaiian resident, by the way. She's registered to vote in Hawaii. The interesting postscript to that is her ex-husband, Tom Arnold, who I love Tom Arnold, great. And if you ever have a chance to see him stand up, he's very underrated. He's really, really good stand-up comic. And he doesn't really have an act. He just stands up there and talks and interacts with the audience. It's a great show. But they had a very nasty public divorce 25 years ago when they were both big stars. And he's been very careful ever since then, never to comment on Roseanne or weigh in any way. So I was kind of curious to see, because everybody was tagging him on that video, wanting him to talk. So I think about 24 hours went by and finally he couldn't help himself. So he did kind of weigh in. I think what he gave some kind of little quip, but it was pretty funny. So that was kind of the interesting postscript if you find his comment where he weighed in. But I think he's kind of afraid to say too much about her because he doesn't want to start any fights.
I don't blame him. Okay, listen, we have to finish ourselves, but I'm thrilled for the opportunity to have this chat with you every week, Ron. We'll come back next Wednesday, do it again as usual. If you want to download the audio podcast, that'll be available later on tonight. Don't forget you can find me on the weekend show. If you missed last week's with me interviewing Simon Rosenberg, I highly recommend that. I'll be back on Sunday doing that here on the Meidas Media Network. Ron, have yourself a great week.
All right. See you next week.